Greetings, Race community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, Brian Hervey, who serves as, wait for it, Vice Chancellor of University Advancement and Alumni Relations and President of the Foundation at the University of California, Irvine. Welcome, Brian.
Well, thank you, Brent. Thanks so much for having me on. And yeah, it's a long title. I have to have my business card has to fold over, to get all that on there.
We'll think of what an acronym could be or something. I don't know. This sector loves acronyms, but I really appreciate you making time. It's a Friday. We're in April for our listeners, and had been hoping to connect with Brian for some time. Really excited about sharing his professional journey. And one of my go-to questions, Brian, has really been to better understand the starting point as it relates to the advancement career path. And oftentimes that can be traced back to your own university experience, which I know is the case for you in a certain degree. And so tell me about junior year of high school, Brian. Who was that guy? Where was he? What was he into? And what led you to Texas A&M University?
Well, so thanks for that question. And so my background was being an Army brat. So I grew up moving around the country and the world, following my father, who was in the U.S. Army. And that was kind of the family business. So my grandfather was a Army aviator. My uncle was an Army aviator. My father was. And so, my path growing up, I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a pilot in the Army and fly helicopters. So I went to Texas A&M. I was in the Corps of Cadets, which is an ROTC program on an Army scholarship. And so I was going through, just putting along, thinking, I would go through that experience and then go into the military. And things changed my senior year. It was 1992, and we were coming out of the Gulf War, and so the military was in something that they do every so often, a reduction in force. And so they didn't need all these second lieutenants coming out and going into the military. So I was faced with a choice at that point of whether I wanted to follow that kind of dream. I mean, it was just sort of what I was going to do, or go into another field. And so the world opened up to me, really. And so I decided I still wanted to be in government service. And so I did a few different things. I told the Army that I would take the option to not go in at that point. They were offering us, it's a kind of a long story, but they were offering us, a lot of us wanted to be combat officers, like I wanted to be a pilot. And they needed logistics people and quartermasters and, things that you have after a war. And so that was not as enticing. And so I took the option to go into law enforcement. And so I did that for a while. And so I got this wonderful number of years where I got to do different things. So I was in law enforcement, and I ran a restaurant, and I was in insurance. I was in the car business, ran a car lot. I just did different things and really got to experience that my life wasn't laid out in front of me in a nice way. And I could just talk to people and learn and get to try new things. So I loved it. I ended up.
And can I just ask, Brian, very unique starting point, right? Military, insurance, car sales. I've done a lot of these interviews. No one has had this starting point leading to advancement leadership. Is there, restaurant work? Is there a common thread of what you enjoyed, despite those being very different contexts and different goals and objectives and industries? Did you find yourself gravitating toward a certain type of work?
I think the relationships was the key thing. So even as a police officer, relationships are very important. How to manage different kinds of people coming at you for different things, whether they're happy, sad, hurt, all kinds of different situations. And so I sort of look at all of those jobs as that relationship part was the key thing that was a driver for me. And getting to meet new people, new experiences. Ended up back in financial services. So at A&M, I was political science and business, and so I ended up sort of gravitating towards the financial services industry, and I ended up doing that for a number of years, which sort of led into the next thing. so I was a financial advisor with Dean Witter Reynolds back in the day, which of course, all of these industries have gone through a lot of mergers. So then I was with Morgan Stanley, and that's when I made the change. So when I was at Morgan Stanley, I was a financial advisor. My wife and I were pregnant with our first child. And so it was a little bit of a difficult pregnancy. And so when Brandon, my son, was born, he ended up in a neonatal intensive care unit. And so everything's fine now. So this is a good story. Nothing bad happened. But it was life-changing, right? So you're new parents and you're going through this situation where you've got a child in the hospital and, dealing with the health issues and while also trying to build a career. And so it made me really think, sitting in that hospital, in that neonatal intensive care unit, how does this stuff happen? So the hospital we were at was Scott and White Hospital in Central Texas, Temple, Texas. And so, but we were living in Bryan College Station, A&M area. I never moved far from the mothership there at A&M. And so, so basically what happens is we're a couple of hours from home, staying in Temple with him in the hospital. And I watched the doctors and the nurses and the medical staff and all the people there at the hospital do everything they could to make us comfortable, to take care of him. And again, good story, no real problems. But it was, you're looking at the equipment and you're looking at the staffing and you're looking at all of this and thinking, well, it could be better, right? It could be, there could be a better situation. We can take more care of more patients. We could have the newest, nicest equipment. You could have more staffing, all these things. And so I started asking about that and asking about, what's the funding model for this hospital? And it's a nonprofit hospital. And so, once Brandon was home and we were, on the mend and he did great. I started looking at that and I volunteered with the March of Dimes. And because the NICU had received a lot of support from the March of Dimes. They were one of the organizations that was buying equipment and, doing sort of grassroots fundraising. So I went home, I joined their group and said, what can I do to help? And so I ran my very first fundraiser. I think it was about 1998. I ran a jail and bail fundraiser. If you remember those kind of events, I don't see those very often anymore, but
as a volunteer.
And so we did really well. We had a really successful event and they said, so now would you run all of our fundraisers and just join the board as the vice president for fundraising? And I said, again, still as a volunteer. And I said, absolutely, I'll do that. So I'll, day job being stockbroker, financial advisor, and then doing lots of fundraising. And as I started doing that over the next couple of years, I was asked to do more fundraisers in our community. A church wanted help building a church building, and an alumni organization needed help at A&M. I mean, I started just kind of doing it for fun. And in the course of doing that, you started to kind of meet more people at the university, and I got more familiar with the Texas A&M Foundation. And so, long story short, a gentleman named Glenn Pittsford, who's now retired, but was the director of planned giving at Texas A&M at their foundation. We had lunch one day and he was just describing what he did. And I said, wow, what a cool job, in terms of what you're doing. And I had that financial planning background. So he made an offer for me to come to work for the Texas A&M Foundation as they began their $1 billion campaign. And that was 2001. So that's when I sort of made the leap. I decided I'm going to leave the financial services industry and get to do what I was really enjoying doing around fundraising full time. And it was just a great experience, a great organization. It was a great campaign. We raised $1.4 billion in that first campaign. And through the course of the campaign, I went from planned giving to, I was a director of development for student affairs. And then I was the executive director of development for the medical school. So I was getting back to sort of that healthcare roots a little bit.
Hey, Brian,
so that kind of led on.
This was about a decade after you'd graduated. You'd been, on the varied career path, have the sort of crucible moment, maybe with the family NICU experience. That's your gateway into volunteerism. What had your relation, and you're in the backyard of Texas A&M. And so at the same time, it sounds like despite that proximity, and then even your own sort of exposure to the philanthropy world by way of March of Dimes, et cetera, sitting down and having that lunch with, I believe you said Glenn,
Yes.
was an eye-opening moment. And so that makes me feel like even though you were so like A&M's on your resume, you live there and learned there, you're living near it for a decade, but maybe it sounds like you didn't really understand the business of philanthropy in the context of A&M until that lunch.
That is very accurate. No, I just started learning basically the volunteer side of fundraising, and that more, as I mentioned, sort of a grassroots fundraising. I had never really thought about, where do these big gifts come from? How do people get from there to making these multi-million-dollar commitments and other commitments to higher education, healthcare, other charitable organizations? So it was a new world.
Now, we have hosted other people who have started in the financial services world broadly. And actually, it seems like planned giving is a common sort of segue or entry point, given that in a certain regard, in a planned giving role, you're still kind of a financial advisor, probably as close to being one as any other, role in the advancement sector. And so just tell me about that transition and going from a really well-known brand, obviously Dean Witter, consolidated with Morgan Stanley, and going through some of those changes. But how different did the job feel when you were sitting at your desk with a set of leads or prospects that you were trying to get in touch with Morgan Stanley being the banner that you were holding, versus it being A&M? Did it feel the same, very different? Like, what were those first impressions of the transition?
I'll tell you, I felt different about it. I felt like it was a sort of a higher calling to be reaching out to primarily alumni of Texas A&M, to have those relationships and those conversations. But the reality is, and I know some folks in our business don't like this particular analogy, but that we are salespeople. I mean, the product we're selling isn't this sort of tangible thing or a service necessarily, but we are selling something, and that is, really the opportunity to be engaged with our great organizations. And so I think those same rules around selling, whether it's selling, financial products or advice or advising people on their charitable giving, I think those same skill sets apply. And I'm driven now, even more, as you get sort of through the management ranks, about, we use Salesforce. That's the program that we happen to use here. And, and so I think that, thinking about all of those rules of how I ran my day, and I need to do this many calls, and I need to do this many outreaches, this week or this month, and this many in-person meetings, that has carried me through all of those careers, but especially in financial services, and then moving into planned giving.
So when you think about the best sales organization that you were part of, would you say that it was Morgan Stanley or one of the other groups that you were part of?
It was Morgan Stanley, because they were a big company and they had a system. And so learning that system really helped me in getting in development.
And if every development professional listening could go and do a shadow internship of the absolute best financial advisors that you had exposure to at Morgan Stanley, what do you think they would find most surprising about how those individuals conduct their day or their week or do their work relative to maybe what they might be experiencing in the typical advancement organization?
I think what drove me in that, and what I have carried through to this career, is certainly it's a little bit of the competitive edge. And so what you learn, especially with organizations, especially in financial services, banking, insurance, they're bringing in a lot of people to keep a few. And so, I would say somewhat fortunately in the charitable side, it's not that cutthroat, at least at most organizations. But I learned that, and it stayed with me, that I never sort of take it for granted what we do, and that ultimately I have to provide a return on investment to the organization. And then I look at every single position within my organization from the same standpoint. And that really came out of that Morgan Stanley or, financial services experience that we had, very, very, metrics that were very laid out. There was a system. They would teach you how to do it. And sometimes in our industry, we don't really train based on sort of a sales model. We train on a little bit of a different model. And really, it's both, right? It's the relationship side that is so important and the mission that we're carrying out, but it's also the production. And I know that sometimes that falls by the wayside a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, you used the word cutthroat before, which I'm sure is not a word that many folks are sitting around saying, oh, I wish our organization were a little more cutthroat. But if I were to reframe it and say intensity, what if there was a higher level of intensity in the advancement sector? And how do you balance the sort of fact that it's, some people are in this sector precisely because they don't want to feel like they're in a cutthroat boiler room environment, pushing a product they might not really believe in, and people who may or may not need it. But I think that you do see this like common mission alignment where people, similar to what you felt, and I started my work as a volunteer for my alma mater, Brown. That's how I kind of stumbled into this sector. It feels really good to inspire people to give, to challenge them to give, to push them to give. But sometimes the intensity is not there. And we see it in data, right? Because we have a lot of data on the Ever2 platform. And there are times we look at this and we say, wait a second, there are development officers who had 3 visits last month. Like in 20 working days, what possibly could they have been doing that was a better use of time than actually having conversations with donors? And I think that, that's probably, no matter what system you're on, if we went in and ran analysis, you're going to see some pattern that is similar to that might get snuffed out a lot sooner at Morgan Stanley.
No, I think you're exactly right, Brent. And I think that what we're seeing in our industry is we're actually moving a little bit in that direction. I don't think we're losing the things that make what we do very important to organizations, but that return on investment piece is becoming more and more important to every one of our organizations. As budgets get tighter, you're looking at every efficiency that you can get out of the organization. I think that each of us has to think about how do we play in that space? What is our role in that space? And are we providing, using technology, using all the tools at our disposal, are we as efficient as we could be? And I think that if I were to say I've seen one thing change in the last 20 years in our industry, it has been that focus on ROI. It's much more said in almost any context as we talk about our industry now, where it used to not be as much. It used to be much more, and I would even say that a lot of organizations I've seen that, they've had the ability to be a little bit more reactive, maybe to the constituencies that are out there. That is no longer the case. I think we have to be proactive.
Well, I think the other fundamental difference, right? I am sure when you were working at Morgan Stanley, let's just be honest, the quality of the leads that you're dealing with is going to be very, very different. And I think one of the massive advantages that the advancement sector has that honestly is a crutch sometimes is the fact that for the most part in targeting an alumni or parent community or even a friend community, there's a pre-existing relationship, a pre-existing commitment. Rarely are we going out and trying to cold prospect into somebody that has no relationship with A&M or no relationship with UC Irvine. It would almost be like if Morgan Stanley had 300,000 people that had made deposits into their, bank account at a small level, for example, but didn't yet have a financial advisor. Well, that would be a lot more fun, or a lot more a natural maybe conversation when, and obviously some banks do work, right, to go from retail to the financial advisor sort of up the pyramid, if you will. But I feel like that is really unique to this advancement sector where we have such a better starting point than most sales organizations that are kind of cold prospecting.
I totally agree with that. And I think that's, you mentioned the differences in that higher calling I mentioned. That's why I think that exists, because I really feel like I'm having a conversation that's not designed to personally benefit me. Whereas in financial services or other things, there's a tie to that call and my personal income in most cases. That's not true in our industry, which is good. I think that's the way it should be. But it makes me feel better at the end of the day that I've connected people with our organization.
You were at A&M for roughly a decade. And when you think about that time, what were some of the favorite memories, favorite gifts, favorite trips, or crazy experiences that maybe stand out?
You know, there are a lot of them, as you can imagine, but I can remember my first $1 million check that a donor signed and handed me. And it was just a wonderful person that wanted to support. As a matter of fact, it was the Corps of Cadets, that military ROTC program that he was supporting. And so I remember, leaving the office, very excited about this meeting, and, driving to Texas is pretty rural in certain places. And so this was a gentleman that lived in a small Texas town on a ranch.
Which town?
Brenham,
Texas. All right. I'm pulling that up on Google Maps, folks. Here we go. Brenham, Texas.
And so he wanted to meet at a little sort of roadside burger place in Brenham, Texas, outside of his ranch. And so we're just having this great conversation at these little high top tables. And he said, I'm ready to support some students that went through the experience that I went through at my university. And he pulled out his checkbook and wrote that, $1 million on a paper check and handed it to me. And that feeling of, wow, this is what I'm here for. And this is what, the good that this new endowment he's established can do for the university. And so
Brian,
I think that was one of very memorable lunches.
I love it. I love just seeing somebody stroke the $1 million check at the high top burger joint. I mean, incredible. But can I ask you, did you ask him for $1 million?
I did. Yeah, we had talked about that proposal. I didn't have to ask that day. He'd seen it.
Yeah. But did you expect that to happen at the meeting?
I did not. No, this was a step in the process, and certainly hoped, but did not know. So it was also the surprise of getting it right there that day.
I love that. What a really cool memory. And then it's all starting to make sense now because you pivoted into the healthcare fundraising sector, and it looks like you came full circle with Scott and White Healthcare Foundation. That had to be pretty fulfilling.
It really was. So yeah, exactly to your point, Brent. I got to go back to the hospital where my son was born, and we had that experience. And I went there as their originally executive director of plan giving, and then campaign director, and eventually vice president for their development program. And so, it was amazing to be back there. And to top that off, I told the story about the NICU and not being great. In terms of the facility, the people were amazing, but it was in the old part of the hospital, and it was an older NICU. We got to build, in my time, once I went to Scott and White, we built a full children's hospital, thanks to a wonderful gift from a Central Texan there, Drayton McLean, who was our board chair, owns McLean Distribution Company. It's all over the country, but right there out of Temple, Texas. And so he made the large gift for our children's hospital, and we got to build a brand new state-of-the-art art NICU to take care of many of those Central Texas children that needed that care that couldn't get to the bigger cities. So it was a wonderful experience. And like you said, it was full circle. I felt like I came back to what got me in development in the first place.
What should people, our audience is primarily education advancement leaders and practitioners. What should this audience understand about healthcare philanthropy? What were the biggest differences? What were the most consistent experience as to what you had felt at A&M?
So I'll say the differences between higher education and healthcare fundraising. For me, most of it has to do with there's a motivation factor, but that motivation factor manifests itself in time. So the time it takes between a higher education typical gift process, sometimes it can take a year or multiple years to build that relationship and get to the point where, maybe there's a test gift and a few other gifts, and then they make that ultimate gift. With the healthcare sector, I find that timeline is truncated and, more of a grateful patient model. So so a grateful patient often is going to make that gift very quickly. And the longer it takes in that cultivation process, I think it's the less likely you're going to receive a large sort of passionate commitment to your organization. So that was the biggest difference for me, is that all of a sudden I was seeing very large gifts in a very short period of time. And so actually I'll be teaching a little bit of some coursework at Madison Institute this summer on grateful patient fundraising, because we really looked at it and tried to study what makes that different and how do you implement a program, because we found that so many healthcare organizations actually weren't making that shift and weren't thinking about that timeline. And so for me, just the kind of the bottom line of it is that, you really want to track your census in your hospital, track the outcomes to the extent you can have that information. And you get that really through the physicians. You don't want the exact medical records, of course, but by working with your physicians, there's a way to know that this patient came through, they're very happy, it's been 60 days or so. We usually look at that sort of 90-day range as a really, really important time to contact that patient and offer the opportunity to be involved and to support, as opposed to higher education, where you might you have those names in your database, but you can kind of get to them when you get to them, in a way, but you can't with patients.
I think it's back to maybe the intensity comment earlier, which is there is sometimes a feeling where in higher ed, you kind of have, 50, 60, 70 years to get to them versus 90 days. And what if we took more of the 90-day mentality in higher ed? Would there be benefits, or would it actually create unnecessary pressure or conflict? And I think calibrating around the right level of intensity that is maybe pushing harder, but not being too pushy is probably a real tough balance to strike.
It is. And with patients, it's somewhat easy to tell what the triggering event is. It was that treatment. With higher education, what is the triggering event? Is it graduation? Is it coming to a reunion? Is it something else that sort of triggers that passion again? And I think on the higher education side, we have to create those. We have to create those opportunities, whether it's through reunions, homecoming, sporting events. We have to create those triggers that allow somebody to reconnect with us and then create the opportunity to follow up.
I agree completely. And I think that, the triggers in my mind that are probably the biggest opportunities for that kind of accelerated model. One, I actually would just say is giving straight up. And I think that one of the areas we're spending a lot of time focusing on is ensuring that we're aligning stewardship with the future value of a relationship as opposed to the immediate past experience. And for example, it is really common as we spend time, with our customers in the sector, that a stewardship matrix might look something like this. Across the top, it's gift amount, and on the side, it's action taken. And then you start seeing examples when you mine data of people that are in the $100, $500, sub-$1,000 donation band with incredible wealth. And they're getting the $100 stewardship experience instead of the 90-day post sort of discharge hospital intensity that maybe, you're talking about. And then the other area where we're seeing a ton of opportunity is around career progression. So many people, especially right now, there's so much focus on higher education and outcomes and driving, more, as you said, ROI on sort of what is the value of the degree. And we're seeing so many examples where alumni are getting promoted into big jobs. And unless it surfaces on a Google alert, hearing nothing from their alma mater. And so how do we sort of be more systematic about more segmented outreach post donation happening and more segmented outreach post career progression to try to create more of a catalyst for conversation in the manner that you're describing? What's your reaction to those concepts?
No, I agree, Brent. And I think that, so on one hand, I think a lot of the old truisms that we learned way back about advancement and that the best predictor of somebody making your next gift is who made the last gift, and just kind of looking at those trends is hugely, hugely important. And I totally agree. That's the best predictor that we have. And then you couple that with technology, the technology that's out there with Evertrue, with other platforms, other tools that we have now, to where on your phone, you can be walking into a meeting with somebody and be able to know all of this information about that person. It might predict and may make your conversation and your outreach to that person so much more meaningful to them. And so, just another way our industry is really changing. But I like what you said about the gifts, because that's, still we've developed all these high-powered algorithms and ways to do the data analysis. But at the end of the day, this is still a numbers game, and it's about relationships.
Totally. No, I mean, it's like that guy who cut the $1 million check at the high top table. The difference, I would argue, between, that check happening and not is you. Like it is about the human relationship. Everything else about that guy, his affinity, his interest, his passion, his wealth, you could have modeled it however you wanted. The difference is it's engaging the person, it's having the conversation, it's doing the discovery, it's pushing somebody to dream bigger. And I think that's where we are making progress, but man, we've got a long way to go. And also it's April of 2023. And so I'd be crazy, to your point of walking in with something on your phone, we are just, now I think starting to scratch the surface of what's possible with generative AI and ChatGPT. And there's so much historical data that's just sitting in our systems. And I don't care what system it is, that is not well synthesized, that is not well summarized, that I think when you start seeing companies like ours and others really harnessing that technology, we're going to radically accelerate what's possible in a way that should really elevate the donor experience, while hopefully making the fundraising job a lot more about the relationship building and a lot less about hunting and pecking through a system or doing the data mining. Absolutely.
And when you talk about all of the folks in our sector being professionals, that's only increasing. We're getting better and better. The people, all of us, are having to get better and better with tools, technology, the relationships themselves. There's a real shift happening, and I can't predict exactly where this is all going to go, because it's changing so fast. And then you add COVID to that, and what that has done to our sector and to our industry. You add the market pressures of salaries and sort of these, that certain organizations certainly, and it makes sense for them, right? That they would look at that ROI and say, well, I just need to pay enough to get the best person. And, I think that those changes, I think, in a sense, are good, but also make it a little tougher to get the kinds of returns for our organizations that we all want to have, because the costs are sort of skyrocketing. But luckily, I think the technology is bringing some costs down.
Yeah, no, and I think there's a lot more to do, and it just feels, we started Evertrue right as sort of social media was exploding and the iPhone and Android were accelerating, and it was kind of this confluence of social, mobile, traditional systems with a focus on advancement, and meeting in the middle was really our focus. And now I kind of feel like this AI wave that is just starting is like that. It's like mobile and social, except faster, with such clear business applications, whereas sometimes it took a little more evangelizing around like what is the potential of harnessing some of those prior trends, whereas it just feels like it's so obvious with this trend. Now it's how do we weave this together effectively to streamline every business, but in our case, the business of advancement. So now it's let's call it 2015. And at that point, like most lifelong Texans, you thought it was the right time to move to California. About
That's right.
that and what all your cousins and friends and family, said. And no, I'm just kidding. You don't have to say that. But that is a big move. Right? I mean, lifelong Texan, moving to California. Tell me about it. Tell me about what led to it. It looks like healthcare was kind of the bridge in. That had to be a big decision.
It was, so I was serving on the board of the AAMC, Association for American Medical Colleges, at that time. And so Baylor, Scott and White, the hospital system where I was working, we had 14 hospitals at the time I was VP there. And so we were going through, it was right around the time after Affordable Care Act, where there was this idea that every hospital system needed to be really, really big. And at the end of that transition, that there might be, say, 10 really big hospital systems across the country, because everything was sort of moving to bigger and bigger. And so we had the hospital system I was at, Scott and White, we're in conversations with Baylor Health in Dallas. And so a much larger hospital system. I think at that time they had 34 hospitals-ish at that point this would have been about 2012, 2013. And so we sort of went into this process of talking about a merger, and that did happen. So in 2015 is when that merger was sort of official. And so I loved it. I mean, I really learned a lot, and the organization, both organizations were great to me, and gave me lots of opportunities to be a part of that, but also decide my destiny at that point of where I wanted to go. And so I was in this great position. I went to a board meeting and I asked the question among the other institutions that were in the room that, I had just gone through this merger and was thinking about my future, of whether it was going to be right there and with the new organization, Baylor, Scott and White, or if I wanted to find a new opportunity, because I love building. I love building teams. I love change management. And so about a week after that AAMC meeting, I received a call from the recruiters for UC Irvine that they were about to embark on a $1 billion plus expansion in the health side. And so I flew down here, and I had traveled the country, as many of us do, a lot more before now that we do now, I'm afraid. But at that time, I was a road warrior, and so I had been traveling all over the country, and I just always loved Southern California. Every time I'd gone to a conference or visited donors here, I thought, this is paradise. It's amazing. I'm about 10 minutes from the beach, and I live here on campus and in the administrative and faculty housing. And so I'm sort of in this great spot next to Newport Beach. And so I toured around. I toured the plans, looked at the plans for the expanded medical center, which we are now completing. We'll have the hospital done in 25. So I was able to be a part of that huge expansion and a new medical center. And so that did it. I flew out here, beautiful weather, the beach, a great project, a great challenge. They wanted us to raise, so I was I was originally hired as the associate vice chancellor for health advancement. So my goal was to raise $1 billion for this expansion. And about 6 months into that, implementing the Grateful Patient program, and I was called to move into this role, the vice chancellor role, for the whole campaign, to get this a $2 billion campaign rolling. And so what an opportunity. Sometimes timing works out really well. So I wanted to come to Southern California. I love the UC system. I already knew quite a bit about it, but I didn't know as much about Irvine. But now that I do, I just, it's just a really, really unique opportunity. And one I like to talk a lot about because it's just been incredible. But yes, health brought me out here, and we have completed that project. We're just a little bit shy of 1.5 billion in the campaign so far. It's a 10-year campaign. And so based on the current numbers, we'll go over that goal here before the 2025 60th anniversary of UCI celebration.
So what are you most excited about having accomplished since you've arrived? And then what is the big ambition of where you think you could go from here? I also just have to say, it is such a stunning area. My family and I did a 10-month RV journey at the beginning of the pandemic with our 3 boys. And one of our absolute favorite stops was at the Newport Dunes campground, which is, I don't know, 9 minutes from you or something like that right now. Newport Dunes Waterfront Resort. That was our, that is 5-star campground. Let's just put it that way. Most of our campgrounds were not quite that nice.
Yeah, you're right. No, it is beautiful. It's just an incredible area. Yeah, I'm glad you got to experience it. So in terms of sort of success stories or things I'm really proud of, one of them is that medical center. That was really something that I wanted to see for the county. It's hard to imagine sometimes when you think about somewhat affluent areas like Orange County, California, it's not that the whole entire county is affluent. There's lots of need. And so this is an area that I consider to be and based on the numbers, was an underserved area medically. And so it needed additional hospitals. And so I'm very proud of that project. I think that what we've also seen, as I mentioned, the university will be 60 in 2025. So it's a fairly young university in the grand scheme of higher education. And so where I've seen the university go in terms of these rankings has been incredible. We're a top 10 U.S. News and World Report university. Lots of great rankings around the sustainability. We're the #1 cool school in the nation. Lots of amazing rankings. So that was also very attractive. And I've been, to me, as a place to be able to raise support, because we have so many great things to be able to talk about. So that sustainability piece is going to be actually something we're launching right now, is a sort of a renewed sustainability push, bringing all of our schools together to think about really big ideas in terms of what the university can do for the world. This is a global issue. And so I'm most proud of the fact that we've made such strides around building up faculty chairs, building scholarships, creating access to higher education to individuals and groups that may not have had that access before. And so it's been, that's why I say it's truly a unique place. Our numbers are wonderful among, we're over 50% first generation college students. And for a University of California campus, many of our campuses are close to those numbers. But it's really an incredible mission I'm proud of.
It's amazing. It shows. And I think one of the commonalities in meeting a lot of advancement leaders through this medium and others is the more that we can position our work as solving problems and less about raising money, the better off we are. So like viewing UC Irvine as a platform to improve healthcare delivery in Orange County, you believe that. It's obvious you believe that. And that is the message that hopefully resonates. And like seeing UC Irvine as a platform to solve sustainability issues, not just in California, but hopefully nationally and globally, like that is more of the positioning that we need in this sector. It's got to be about solving a problem, and solving problems of access for first gen is certainly something that resonates with our audience for sure.
Thank you.
Tell me about the team. Are you hiring right now? If folks want to stay in touch, what's a good way to do that?
No, thank you for that question. We are hiring. So we have about 220 staff here at UCI that are involved in either advancement or our alumni relations at the Alumni Association. Lots of positions right now. So we are probably among the organizations, and maybe a few right now, that are sort of staffing up a bit. We're looking at the successful completion of this campaign, and then what comes next. And there's a lot that comes next after this. And so, like many organizations, there's been a lot of turnover through COVID, and it's changed a lot of the ways our organizations operate. Brought in a lot of flexibility, things that I would have never really thought about 5 years ago, that the way our industry might look, it has all changed. And I have my thoughts about that. I think, again, our business is a relationship business. So I'm looking to bring on more people that are that want to represent a wonderful cause, a wonderful organization, but also are thinking about how important those relationships are and wanting to be there to make that happen. And so while many, like we are with many other organizations, a bit flexible, I'm really trying to build up our relationship team, the folks that are going to be out there making those contacts.
You mentioned earlier, and you've hinted at it throughout the conversation, that COVID changed things. You used to be a road warrior, now maybe not as much. Like, how do you envision, and I feel like more broadly, we've been in a little bit of this tug of war between back to office, lean into remote, hybrid. Who knows? Like it'll play out. But there's definitely a bit of a tug of war right now. What do you reflect on? What are the positives? What are the challenges? And then I guess where are you all on that spectrum?
So that's a great question, Brent. I think first and foremost, I think it made us all take a little bit of a step back and think about what's important. What's important in our lives, our health, our families, our the people around us. And so I think that's changed a lot. And then we all had quite a bit more time with those loved ones, potentially not being able to be out and traveling and eating out and all those things. So I think that on one side, probably many of us are far more thankful and thoughtful about our lives and that balance between work, family, time to relax and recharge. And so that's to me a very good thing. I think the other side of that a little bit is that, we got out of some habits that I think I would have said before COVID, especially for UC Irvine, we were pretty hard charging moving towards that campaign goal. And then everything sort of stopped. Everyone went home and we had to sort of regroup. And so I feel like now many organizations, us included, are sort of in this rebuilding of staff, of what positions we need, how to be efficient, to get the production where it was to pre-COVID levels. I feel like we've done well with the production side, thanks to so many generous people in our communities. Our donors are still giving. They gave through COVID. They continue to give. It did change the priorities a little bit. I see that there's a health tie to many more gifts than there were before, even if they're for a school that's not traditionally in the health field. They're looking at engineering and looking at health research, or in physical sciences or biological sciences, and they're asking more questions about human health and how they can support those areas. And so that's been a great shift. And now it's sort of getting back to efficient systems to be able to handle all of these inquiries and all of the things that we have to do. We found, probably not surprisingly, certain processes like things like as simple as check processing have slowed down, because sometimes people, there's a bit of flexibility in work, and maybe some people are not in the office certain days, or they're working remotely, and things that actually need a hand on to hand off to the next person. We've had to find technology solutions to make sure we can keep those processes sharp.
When you think about peers that you rely on, do who's on your speed dial? If you're, when you think about time at A&M or in the healthcare sector, or maybe now in the UC kind of system community, for example, like who are some of the other advancement leaders you've really enjoyed getting to know?
I mentioned Glenn Pittsford early on because he was the person that brought me into this field, and he was my mentor at A&M for many, many years. He's just been incredible, and getting me into this field and getting me acclimated fast, and really led to the success that I've had. Ed Davis was the president of the the Texas A&M Foundation, and he was always somebody who just kind of when you're a new gift officer, you're looking at the president of the foundation and thinking, wow, that's how do they do all of this and raise this much money? And he was just so easy to, go into his office and sit down and talk about, career growth and what came next. And then at Baylor, Scott and White first, Nancy Birdwell was a mentor of mine. She really, she was the chief development officer there, took me under her wing, and really, me and the leadership team, she really developed wonderful leaders while we were all there. And through that merger process, she retired right towards the end of that process. That allowed me to have some additional opportunities there. So it'd be hard if I really thought about it. I could write a long list of people that, we've all depended on each other, and there's just so many people that have been really influential and instrumental in the success that I've had, not on my own, but as a team.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure learning a lot more about you in a short amount of time, and such a fun kind of varied entry point into the sector. But it's clear that you found the right fit, and your passion for the work broadly and specifically for the organizations you've served is so clear, and I'm sure that rubs off on your team and your community. So thanks for sharing.
Well, Brent, thank you, and thanks to the audience for listening. I'm happy to help anybody that needs my help or wants to talk. I want to give back as well.
Well, that'll be a great way to conclude then, Bryan. I know you're active on LinkedIn. Is that a good way for folks to connect with you, or is there another medium you'd prefer?
Yeah, LinkedIn is perfect. That's
cool.
Fantastic.
Well, please reach out to Bryan if you listen to this episode and want to stay in touch. Mention you heard him on the Raise podcast, and thank you again, Bryan. It's a privilege. And so with that, I'm going to close today's episode with Brian Hervey from UC Irvine. Thank you, Bryan, and take care, everybody.